to follow Harry. It's been so lovely to work with him on the project. The words I want you to thank you for the introduction very much. So, what I'm going to talk about might seem a little bit tangential and off that subject of world without words, really, but I do think it relates, and because it's quite a short talk that I'm going to give, I do see it as perhaps part of a series of engagements that I might make over this project to do with something, one of the very few things that I have a tiny bit of expertise in, but I certainly don't possess any when it comes to neuroscience or really anything else in life. But it's about boxing, which is something that I've been involved in for a very long time, and maybe wider to say martial arts in general. I thought it might be quite interesting to begin by trying to express why I'm passionate about boxing and why I've been an advocate of it for a lot of my adult life, really. To do that before I kind of presage with some arguments about what's really happened in the sport in the last 10 to 15 years, because there has been an extraordinary sea change taking place in combat sports and in sports in general over the last 20 years, which has far-reaching effects and relates specifically to neurological issues, and perhaps that'll prove being of interest. So, as a child, really, what I was really drawn to with boxing, what really fascinated me, was perhaps very different than what a lot of other people would think when they look at boxing from the outside. What I saw immediately, at a very, very young age, I began training martial arts at the age of 3 or 4, what I saw immediately was something that really was a sign of the human ability to innovate a model through our self-reflection and reflexivity, to develop an expertise, to impose an element of technique. Technique is the thing that always excited me, and still does to this day. Generally speaking, I teach self-defense, and in the self-defense community, a lot of the analogies are drawn between animals and men and male violence, and the two categories that people talk about are predatory violence, which is when someone just wants to attack someone to kill them, the equivalent in the animal world being to eat them, and the monkey dance, which is what you've seen in pubs, I'm sure, between two men who say, hold me back, what did you say? And so the thing builds. Really, that isn't to hurt each other, that's to develop a social display, a hierarchical display of masculinity to gain a certain level of identity. Animals do this when they find other animals of their own species. When bears wrestle around our heads, they don't try and kill each other in the same species, they're trying to establish a social hierarchy and dominance. This is, in effect, the major element of what martial arts are. They are for war and things, but not really in our world. They're about creating areas where two males normally can butt heads without one of them dying. And sports in general are analogous to this. They're all a giant social experiment to allow people to be competitive and aggressive, to establish social hierarchy without people dying. So in fact, that's what I thought boxing was. I thought it was the purest form of that, because people still do very much get hurt. And when you watch children fight, and you watch how they naturally do battle each other, we've all seen or probably been involved in kids headlocking each other and wrestling them to the floor, it is not a destructive force, it is not people dying. What boxing is, essentially, is humans refining that art to really specific technical application so that your natural instincts to club each other like a gorilla are removed and replaced by something far more destructive. So when you see someone on the street throwing a punch, and my favourite punch, always because of a boxer called Miguel Cotto, a Puerto Rican boxer, is the left hook. Because the left hook is the most unnatural punch you can possibly throw if you're right-handed. Everybody's left side is wonky if you're right-handed. And to be able to control your body enough to be able to throw this hand in a perfect loop to hit someone in the face, actually incredibly difficult. Do try it at home if you've never thrown a left hook. Try and swing your left hand and hit someone in the head. And what I saw was kids in the playground doing this and just winging their arm like a gorilla. And then when I went to boxing class, I was told to change my base so that my balance was spread, so that if someone pushed me or hit me, I wouldn't get knocked off balance. And I was told that the punch begins at my foot, that it's about kinetic weight displacement, that by turning my front of my foot, by dropping the weight into my knee, into my shoulder, and by allowing my arm to just be an extension of that weight turn, instead of the punch just being literally my arm weight, it would be my whole body that would transfer the weight from my legs, up my knees, through my shoulder, and then through the target. And moreover, with the left hook, the whole point in boxing is, when you jab, someone always moves away from your big power punch, your right hand, so they move to their right or your left. And as you're jabbing, if you left hook and they go that way, they get hit by the punch. So it's this beautiful set of arrangements. Technique meets thinking through other people's movement. And when you apply that to a street situation or something, it's like night and day. That hierarchy compared to that technique is really what the purpose and ethics of martial arts is. You give someone the tools to do something really well. They don't normally want to go and then do it in a pub Not always the case, but sometimes that is the case. So for many years after I started training very seriously in martial arts, and around the age of 19, I left England and I trained very seriously in striking arts and thought about taking professional fights in Thai boxing and boxing, and I didn't. And the reason why I didn't is when I went to gyms, and I spoke to men in their early 30s, the age I am now, or a little bit younger even, I noticed that they had slurred speech, and some of them had vision problems, and some of them had terrible troubles remembering basic details or short-term memory. And I would also see that there was an incredibly masculine culture within the gyms, this is in 2005 or whatever, of gym wars, i.e. people training as hard as they actually would fight, but they're not getting paid for it, just because they were so proud they would punch each other as hard as they could in the gym. And I didn't want that to happen to me. And it wasn't because I was scared of the pain, as a lot of people accused me of at the time. It was because I didn't want to have slurred speech and have memory loss. And I didn't really know what the conditions of that were or what it meant. But what I did know, the reason why I kept advocating martial arts, is because it became very clear to me, to cover it quickly, that a lot of people in different environments, often working class environments in different countries, use violence as a way to gain power over other people. They use violence, physical strength, as a way to bully other people, and they use that technique to do that. Where boxers decide, for virtually no money, to take on someone of equal weight, technique, standing, with warning, starve themselves to make weight, go into a ring and risk getting knocked out or be derided and spat upon, all for the sake of pride and courage. And that struck me as an incredibly ethical thing, very much the opposite of someone going into their local pub and punching bells out of someone, weakening them to feel big. They risk everything for almost no reward, and that's a very beautiful, ethical, internal kind of pride. So for a long time I advocated it very much. About 1928, there was a doctor who was working ringside in boxing, came up with a terminology called punch drunk, being punch drunk. And we all kind of heard this term. It means someone who seems a little bit different than they once were because of a career spent in boxing. Then for a long time the terminology used around that condition, which was incredibly loose and amorphous, almost kind of fictional in its characterization, was pugilistic dementia. The notion that some boxers, when they got a little bit older, had created this persona change through the damage they'd taken. But again, this was all given over to maybe a character-based thing, not a biological or neurological thing. In 2005, when I stopped fighting, that was the case. In the entire world, when people talked about boxing, what I've just described, that loose, general kind of comic term, pugilistic dementia, of being punch drunk, was all there was 10 years ago. In 2007, there was a professional wrestler called Chris Benoit who murdered his wife and his son. This happened at the same time as a spate of NFL, American football players, turning on people and massive suicidal rampages with guns. And slowly but surely, when you look back statistically through the history of these contact sports, you see an unbelievable frequency of suicide, homicide, domestic violence, depression, just an incredibly high count of this. So after Chris Benoit's highly publicized murder of his wife and suicide, Boston University began a program of analyzing the brains post-mortem of athletes who had played high-impact sports, primarily the NFL, American football, not really boxing. What they found was that a degenerative brain disease from repeated impact to the head had altered these men's lives to the point where it was translated into powerful social, personal, emotional characteristic change. Confusion, relentless headaches, paranoia, mood swings, violent acts, depression, even into things like schizophrenia, blindness, deafness, massive, profound physiological changes because of something that had been seen collectively as maleness or sport. This is 10 years ago that this discovery is kind of made, and the name pugilistic dementia, which is still traced to this, is now called CTE, it's chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I pronounced that just about right. So essentially what happens, how many people have been hit in the head in the last year? Anyone? So a boxer in a boxing match with giant puffy pillows on his hands, big enough and soft enough so that when he gets punched in the head it doesn't really knock him out, who rarely gets knocked out, would say conservatively take 8 to 10 blows a round to the head. Most fights are 12 rounds, rare that they get a knockout. If a boxer gets knocked out 3 or 4 times in a row, the actual licensing board will deny him a license, so you can't get knocked out over and over again. And in fact, journeymen, professional boxers who are paid to lose, their job is not to get knocked out and lose well to make the other guy look good. So over the course of a career, say 10 blows a round, 12 rounds, say 30 fights, 40 fights, it's 4,000 to 5,000 blows to the head. an NFL player who starts as a child with a helmet on, crashing into the kids from the age of 5, hundreds of thousands of blows to the head. What has been absolutely agreed upon within the medical community that studies these brains is that it is extraordinary concussive trauma which causes CTE. So we now know that there's a specific disease related to repeated concussive blows to the brain, and this disease, through these impacts that are socially given and kind of accepted as a masculine thing to go back in and keep fighting or keep playing American football, is really something that leads to complete, profound personality change. What actually happens within CTE, which is very interesting, and I won't go too scientific because we have real scientists in the room, so I don't want to embarrass myself. But essentially, as it's been explained to me in the research I've done over the last 2 or 3 years when I've been talking and writing about this, is that within the axon in the brain, which I won't go into too much detail about, there is something called a microtubule, which is like a transport system for carrying a protein from a neuron to a synapse. And what happens with CTE, with these repetitive concussions, is that that microtubule kind of starts to disintegrate, splits, and basically disappears. The cell evaporates. That's the right word. It dies, basically. The extraordinary thing with CTE, and one of the primary things they can't understand, is that even after the impacts are stopped, even after the punches stop coming and the hits stop coming, it still happens. So essentially, as these athletes who have suffered these repeated blows to the head grow older, even though they're not getting hit in the head anymore, the disease continues. And one of the studies showed that out of a vast array of brain samples, the average big male brain is 1,500 grams in weight. An Alzheimer's patient in the later stages of that disease is 1,100. These American footballers who are massive men was 800 grams. It was an infant's brain. So many brain cells have died over the latter part of their careers that they essentially have become infants. So away from the ones that turn violent, there is a massive amount of men, which must have been happening for hundreds of years in boxing especially, who have essentially needed full-time infant care because they've developed dementia. Now the cases that have really kicked this off as a major issue in America have been the fact that young men have killed themselves or died or developed dementia in their early 20s because they've begun playing American football so young that that disease has already started to happen. An incredible thing also with CTE is that every single one is different. It's detected, just one of its elements, by a flooding of something called tau protein in the brain. This can be seen when scanned. And for the first time last year, they were able to identify CTE in living retired American football players. The first time ever that it had not been post-mortem. Before that was only in dead brains that they could see it was there. And what happened is every single person who suffers from CTE has a different pattern on their brain. Because it's about the genetic predisposition meeting what specific blows hit your head. Almost like a creative work of art, that the way you've been punched or cracked in the skull has given you this imprint on your brain, this sentence. Now the thing that boxing has lived off for many years is that you do need a genetic predisposition. Some men have been punched in the head for 20 years and they never suffer any effects. And boxing always laid that out as though it was a personality characteristic, as though some men were tougher than others and could resist it. And the really extraordinary thing, and probably where I'll end, is that while the NFL has completely restricted its rules and changed everything because it's been sued by the Players Union, the WWE with professional wrestling has changed its practices completely. Boxing has changed nothing. In fact, it's been the most unrecognizing sport of this disease, when it is clearly the sport that's having it most. And what the future is from the developments at Boston University and other places, and what really fascinates me, and something perhaps I'll go on to talk about at the next event, is that there's clearly going to be technology in the next 10 years where boxers are going to be able to know at a young age whether they're genetically predispositioned to have CTE or not. And so the choice they then make to box or not box against someone who doesn't have the predisposition is going to change the entire culture of how people look at them through their career. Because if you are predisposed to having it and you choose to fight anyway, which is something that really, in colloquial terms, is what's happening now. Young boxers I know who know they might get brain damage but still fight. How is an audience, what's the language going to be around those boxers who they know every time they get punched, their personality, their memory, their ability to function neurologically is being eroded? Thank you.